Hey guys, tonight we're stepping aboard one of history's most nightmarish floating dungeons, the 18th century prison ship. Picture this. You're standing on a London dock in 1776, iron shackles biting into your wrists, as guards shove you toward a rotting hulk that was once a proud warship. The smell hits you first, a wall of human waste, decay, and death so thick you can taste it. Above you, the stripped masts reach toward the sky like skeletal fingers, and below deck, hundreds of men are crammed into darkness so complete you'll forget what sunlight looks like. You probably won't survive this, and honestly, the odds are mathematically in favor of that grim outcome. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing our global bedtime community come together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a petty thief. Maybe you stole a loaf of bread, or perhaps you lifted a handkerchief from a gentleman's pocket in Covent Garden. The year is 1778, and Britain's criminal justice system is in absolute chaos. See, there's this tiny problem across the Atlantic. The American Revolution has just cut off the primary dumping ground for British convicts. For decades, England solved its crime problem by simply shipping prisoners to the American colonies. But now those ungrateful colonists have decided they'd rather not be Britain's penal colony anymore. Rude, honestly. The government scrambles for solutions. Australia won't become the go-to destination for another decade, and the prisons on land are bursting at the seams. Someone in Parliament has a brilliant idea. Why not use old, decommissioned warships as floating prisons? These hulks, vessels too damaged or outdated for naval service, can be anchored in harbors and rivers, turning them into temporary holding facilities. Temporary, they promise. Temporary turns into decades. You're marched up a narrow gangplank, and you get your first real look at your new home. The ship before you is a corpse. Once, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, she sailed into battle, her cannons roaring, her sails full of wind. Now she's stripped bare, her gun ports sealed or barred, her deck weathered to a splintered gray. Historians still argue whether the prison hulk system was intended as a stopgap measure or a deliberate instrument of terror. But standing here, shackled and terrified, the intention hardly matters. The guards, hardened men who view you as slightly less valuable than the rats you'll soon meet, process you with brutal efficiency. They strip you of your possessions, what few you have. That lucky coin your mother gave you, gone. The worn shoes on your feet, replaced with wooden clogs that'll give you blisters within hours. They shave your head, ostensibly to prevent lice, though you'll discover this is laughably futile. The lice here are evolutionarily superior, probably pay rent, and have established complex societies of their own. You're given your prison uniform, a crude outfit marked with broad arrows, the king's mark, turning you into crown property. The fabric is rough, already stiff with the sweat and grime of whoever wore it before you, assuming they didn't die in it, which they probably did. No laundry service on a prison hulk, friend. You'll wear these clothes until they rot off your body or you rot first, whichever comes sooner. The guard captain reads out the rules in a monotone voice, as if he's recited this speech 10,000 times, which he probably has. No fighting, no stealing from other prisoners, no attempting escape. The punishments for these infractions are severe, he promises, though he doesn't elaborate. You'll learn soon enough. He mentions something about work details. During the day, you'll be rowed to shore to labor in dockyards or dredge rivers. At night, you return to the hull. This is your life now, possibly until death, possibly until transportation to some other nightmare destination. Then comes the moment you'll replay in your mind during countless sleepless nights. The descent below deck. The hatch opens, and a gust of warm, fetid air rushes up to greet you. It's like opening an oven filled with rotting meat. Your eyes water. Your stomach lurches. The guard behind you plants a hand between your shoulder blades and shoves, and you stumble down a ladder so worn and slick with grime you nearly fall. The darkness below is absolute. Your eyes, accustomed to the overcast London daylight, can't process anything at first. You hear them before you see them, the prisoners, Coughing, groaning, arguing, praying. Someone's singing a bawdy song in the corner. Someone else is crying. The ship creaks and sways gently with the tide, and you feel the first stirrings of seasickness, which is ironic because this ship will never sail again. As your vision adjusts to the dim light filtering through the barred gun ports, you start to make out shapes. Bodies. So many bodies. Men are packed into this space like cargo, because that's essentially what you are. The tween deck, the deck below the main deck where you now stand, was once used to store supplies or house sailors. Now it houses humanity in its most degraded form. You're assigned a sleeping space, a wooden platform about 6 feet long and 18 inches wide. This is your bed, your chair, your entire personal territory. The man to your left, a skeletal figure with hollow eyes, tells you his name was Thomas. Was? You ask. I'm not that person anymore, he says and laughs. A wet, rattling sound that makes you think of death. The man to your right doesn't acknowledge you at all, just stares at the ceiling beams inches from his face. The architecture of this space is deliberately oppressive. The ceiling is so low you can't stand upright. You'll spend your time below deck hunched over or sitting. The ship's hull curves inward, creating pockets where water and filth collect. There's no ventilation to speak of, just those barred gun ports, and in winter, they'll be sealed shut. The air is thick, soupy, hard to breathe. It's like being slowly suffocated by an invisible pillow made of despair and methane. Historians have documented that these prison hulks were moored primarily in the Thames, at Portsmouth, and at Plymouth. The most infamous was probably the HMS Jersey, which Americans know as the Hell Ship, moored off Brooklyn during the Revolutionary War and holding captured American sailors. British prison hulks held a mix of criminals, everyone from murderers awaiting execution to children who'd stolen food. Yes, children. The 18th century wasn't big on distinguishing between adult and juvenile offenders. You notice the demographics of your new neighbors. There are men of all ages, from teenagers to grandfathers. Some are hardened criminals with scars and missing teeth and eyes that have seen too much. Others look like clerks or shopkeepers, guilty of embezzlement or fraud, completely out of their depth in this environment. There's a ragged group in the corner that Thomas identifies as sailors. Men who committed crimes while in the Royal Navy and got transferred here instead of being hanged. They stick together, speaking in their own maritime slang, eyeing everyone else with suspicion. The ship rocks again, and you hear a sound that turns your blood cold. Scratching. Tiny claws on wood. Lots of tiny claws. The rats here are legendary, Thomas tells you with what might be pride. They're huge, fearless, and they've developed a taste for human flesh. They'll bite sleeping men, gnaw on your feet if you don't keep them covered, and they're particularly fond of attacking the sick and weak. You'll learn to sleep with your arms crossed over your chest and your hands tucked under your armpits, protecting your fingers. There's a bucket in the corner. One bucket, for waste, for all the men on this deck. It's emptied once a day, if you're lucky. Sometimes the guards forget. Sometimes they don't care. The smell emanating from that corner is its own entity, a living thing that coats your throat and makes you gag for the first few days. Eventually, mercifully, your nose will give up and stop processing it. Small blessings. Night falls, your first night aboard the Hulk. You didn't think it could get darker below deck, but somehow it does. Someone has a candle, which is immediately confiscated by a larger prisoner who declares that light is a privilege you have to earn. You lie on your wooden platform, listening to the symphony of human misery around you, coughing, wheezing, weeping, praying. The ship groans as the tide shifts. Something scurries past your head. Please let it be a rat and not something worse. You try to sleep, but sleep seems impossible in this place. Your mind races through the events that brought you here, the trial that took all of 15 minutes, the judge's bored expression as he sentenced you to imprisonment until transportation could be arranged. Transportation to where? Van Diemen's Land, maybe once they get those ships running. Or maybe you'll just rot here until disease claims you, like it's claimed so many others. Thomas, your neighbor, whispers in the darkness. First night's the worst. You'll get used to it. But his voice cracks as he says it, and you realize he's trying to convince himself as much as you. You'll learn that Thomas has been here for 3 years. 3 years on this floating tomb, waiting for a transportation ship that may never come. Some men have been here longer, much longer. There are debates among historians about whether the Hulk system was more humane than execution or transportation, but lying here in the dark, surrounded by the sounds and smells of human degradation, you'd take the noose or the long sea voyage in a heartbeat. The hull creaks. Water laps against the sides. Someone starts coughing. A deep, consumptive hack that goes on until it finally trails off into silence. You don't know if they're dead or just exhausted. You don't ask. You close your eyes and try to remember what freedom felt like, what fresh air smelled like, what hope felt like. The memories are already fading, replaced by the immediate, overwhelming reality of your new existence. Welcome to the prison Hulk. You're going to wish you'd never been born. The morning comes not with sunlight, but with shouting. Guards storm below deck, banging their clubs against the wooden beams, roaring for everyone to wake up. You've maybe slept 2 hours, drifting in and out of consciousness more than actual rest. Every muscle in your body aches from the hard wooden platform, and you discover that your neck has a crick in it from the awkward angle you maintained all night, trying not to touch the man next to you. As you sit up carefully, because smacking your head on the low ceiling is a rite of passage everyone experiences exactly once. You get your first real daylight look at your new ecosystem. An ecosystem is truly the right word, because this space is teeming with life, just not the kind you'd want at a dinner party. The rats are everywhere, not scurrying in the shadows like respectable vermin, but strutting around openly like they own the place, which, honestly, they kind of do. These aren't the small, timid mice you might find in a London townhouse. These are Hulk rats, massive, battle-scarred veterans of the prison ship system, some nearly the size of small cats. They've grown fat on a steady diet of prison rations, human waste, and occasionally human flesh. You watch one drag a piece of hardtack across the deck, completely unbothered by the 100 men sharing its space. Thomas, who's becoming your unwitting tour guide to hell, explains the rat situation with the weary patience of a man who's given this speech before. "They're worse at night," he says, scratching at a bite mark on his forearm. "They can smell weakness, disease. They'll go for the sick ones first, the men who can't fight back. I've seen them chew through a man's toes while he was too fevered to wake up." He says this casually, like he's discussing the weather, and you realize this is what happens to your sense of normal in this place. Horrors become mundane. Historians still argue whether the rat population on prison hulks served any beneficial purpose, with some suggesting they helped control other vermin and dispose of waste. But living here, watching a rat the size of a small dog eye you with what can only be described as calculation, you're pretty sure the rats aren't helping anyone but themselves. But the rats are just the beginning of your new roommates. The lice are perhaps worse because they're inescapable. Within 24 hours of boarding, you'll have them. They live in the seams of your clothing, in your hair. Oh wait, they shaved that. But they'll find other places. Your eyebrows, your groin, anywhere warm with blood close to the surface. You'll itch constantly, mindlessly, until you're scratching in your sleep. Some men scratch themselves raw, creating wounds that then become infected, which creates a whole new set of problems. The lice here have evolved into super lice, resistant to the few pathetic attempts at delousing the guards occasionally make. You'll try everything. Dunking your clothes in seawater, which just makes them salty and still full of lice. Sitting in the sun on deck during work details, which gives the lice a nice tan. Praying, which the lice seem immune to. The itching becomes such a constant companion that you'll almost miss it on the rare occasions it stops, wondering what's wrong. Then there are the fleas, the bedbugs, the weevils in your food. We'll get to that nightmare later. And a fascinating array of fungi that grow in the perpetually damp corners of the hull. You'll become an amateur mycologist whether you want to or not, learning to distinguish between the black mold, the green mold, and the particularly virulent orange stuff that seems to glow faintly in the dark. Some of the fungi are probably new to science, and if there were any scientists foolish enough to study them, they'd be thrilled. You are not thrilled. The physical structure of the ship itself becomes a character in your daily suffering. This vessel was built for war, not habitation. Every surface is hard, unforgiving wood or cold iron. The hull curves in ways that create pockets where water collects. Stagnant, brackish water that breeds mosquitoes in summer and freezes into treacherous ice slicks in winter. The ship was never designed to be stationary, so without the constant movement of sailing, water seeps in through gaps and cracks, pooling in the bilge below your deck. The bilge water becomes a toxic soup of waste, seawater, and things you don't want to identify, and the smell wafts up through the deck boards like Satan's own potpourri. You notice the ghosts quickly, not literal ghosts, though some men swear they've seen them, but the evidence of previous prisoners. Names and dates carved into every available surface. John Mills, 1775, scratched into a beam near your head. God have mercy, etched into the deck plank. Tally marks counting days, weeks, years. Some prisoners have scratched elaborate drawings into the wood, ships, houses, women's faces. Anything to maintain some connection to the world they've lost. You trace your fingers over these carvings and wonder, did John Mills survive? Did he make it to transportation? Or did he die here? His bones tossed into the Thames or buried in an unmarked grave on the shore. There's a quirky aspect to prison ship culture that catches you off guard. The naming of spaces. The prisoners have given everything names, creating a strange map of their wooden hell. The bucket corner is called the Parliament because, as one toothless old man explains, it's where everyone talks shit. The area near the ladder is Piccadilly because it's high traffic and occasionally you might see something interesting. The darkest corner, where the sickest men are moved to die, is called the graduation room because, well, that's where you graduate from this life to the next. The social geography of the deck becomes clear as you observe. The stronger, more established prisoners have claimed the spots nearest the gun ports, where at least some air and light penetrate. The weakest, the newest, the sickest, they get pushed to the interior, where the darkness is complete and the air is worst. Your spot, being new, is somewhere in the middle, which Thomas assures you is actually decent luck. Could be worse, he says, gesturing toward graduation room where a man is coughing up what sounds like pieces of his lungs. You start to notice the microecosystems within the ecosystem. There's a patch of deck where water constantly drips from above, creating a small pool. The rats have established this as neutral territory, a watering hole where they drink alongside men who've given up any pretense of dignity. There's a crack in the hull where sunlight streams through at a certain time of day, creating a golden rectangle on the floor that men will fight over, desperate for those few minutes of warmth and light on their skin. The sounds of the ship become your new reality. The constant creaking of wood as the vessel strains against its anchor chains. The scurrying of rats in the walls. The drip 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 of water finding new ways to leak in. Human sounds. Coughing, groaning, arguing, praying, weeping. Sometimes singing sad songs, bawdy songs. Hymns sung in cracked voices by men desperately trying to remember they're human. The guards' boots on the deck above. A constant reminder of the world you can no longer access. At night, the ship comes alive with sounds that aren't supposed to be there. Scratching in the walls that's too loud to be rats. Footsteps when everyone's accounted for. Thomas tells you about the ghosts. Dozens of men have died on this hulk. Their bodies dumped unceremoniously into the river or buried in mass graves on shore. They say the Jersey in America had over 10,000 deaths, he whispers. Imagine those ghosts. We've probably only got a few hundred here. Could be worse. His logic is unassailable and deeply disturbing. The smell, though, nothing prepares you for how the smell evolves. That first overwhelming assault was bad enough, but as days pass, you start to distinguish layers. There's the base note of human waste and unwashed bodies. The middle note of rot and decay from the bilge. The top notes of vomit, blood, and the sweet, cloying smell of infection. And underneath it all, something else. The smell of despair itself, if despair had an odor. It's metallic and sour and wrong, and it permeates everything. You'll never get the smell out of your nose. Even if you survive this place, even if you're transported to Australia or somehow pardoned, you'll catch a whiff of something decades later. Rotting wood, stagnant water, unwashed wool, and you'll be right back here, 18 years old and terrified in the belly of a floating coffin. The ecosystem includes a surprising number of insects beyond the lice and fleas. There are beetles of various sizes, some quite large, scuttling along the beams. Cockroaches, which seem almost friendly compared to the rats. In summer, flies swarm in biblical proportions, drawn by the waste bucket and the open sores on sick men. They land on your food, your face, your lips. You learn to eat with one hand while fanning flies with the other, a skill you never imagined needing. Some prisoners have attempted to domesticate certain aspects of the ecosystem. One man has befriended a particular rat, feeding it choice scraps and claiming it keeps other rats away. Another has cultivated a patch of mold he swears has medicinal properties. Whether it does or not is questionable, but the belief gives him purpose. A group near the bow has created an elaborate system of string and cloth to catch dripping water, giving them slightly fresher drinking water than the brackish stuff in the communal barrel. These small acts of agency, of imposing order on chaos, are what keep men sane. Mostly, the Hulk's ecosystem exists in a strange suspended state between the natural world and human civilization. You're on a ship, surrounded by water, technically in nature, but completely cut off from it. You can hear seabirds calling outside, but you can't see them. You can smell the salt air when the wind blows right, but you can't feel the breeze. You exist in this liminal space, neither fully in the world nor fully out of it, and it creates a psychological pressure that's almost physical. Thomas tells you about the seasons on the Hulk. Summer is hell. The heat trapped below deck becomes unbearable, men collapse from heat stroke, and the smell reaches levels that seem scientifically impossible. Winter is different hell. The cold penetrates the hull, frost forms on the inside walls, and men huddle together for warmth despite their hatred of touching each other. Spring brings rain, which leaks through every crack, making everything perpetually damp. Fall is actually tolerable, he says, which tells you everything about how degraded his standards have become. You lie on your platform that first full day, exhausted from a sleepless night, and watch the ecosystem function around you. A rat fights another rat over a crumb. Lice march in formation across a sleeping man's neck. Water drips steadily from a crack above, creating a rhythm like a clock counting down to nothing. The hull creaks and groans like a living thing in pain. This is your world now. This wooden tomb with its crawling, scratching, dripping, stinking collection of life and almost death. You share this space with rats who've tasted human flesh, lice immune to all intervention, ghosts carved into the beams, and men who've forgotten what hope tastes like. Welcome to the ecosystem of the 18th century prison Hulk. You're definitely not going to last a day here, but you'll try anyway because what else can you do? The breakfast bell, if you can call the guards hollered rations. A bell comes too early and not early enough. You've been awake for hours anyway, listening to the symphony of suffering around you. So when the call comes, you're almost relieved to have something to do besides contemplate your new reality. The ration distribution is a carefully choreographed chaos. Men line up at the base of the ladder, shuffling forward in a queue that's somehow both orderly and desperate. You follow Thomas's lead, learning the unspoken rules. Don't push, that gets you beaten by the guards or the other prisoners. Don't hang back, the rations run short and latecomers get nothing. Find the Goldilocks zone of assertive but not aggressive, present but not pushy. When you finally reach the front, a guard with breath that could strip paint hands you your breakfast. Let's inventory this feast, shall we? One piece of hardtack, ship's biscuit, that staple of naval life that's somehow even worse than its reputation suggests. This particular specimen is roughly the size of your palm, hard enough to break teeth, and riddled with holes. The holes aren't decorative. They're made by weevils. Don't worry about the weevils, Thomas says cheerfully, tapping his biscuit against the deck railing to knock out the visible insects. Dozens of small white larvae fall out, along with a few adult beetles. Extra protein. You'll learn to appreciate them. He bites into his biscuit with a crunch that makes you wince. You examine your own ration and count at least 20 weevil holes. Some of the insects are still inside, you can see them moving. The biscuit is also spotted with what might be mold or might be some other type of fungus. It's impossible to tell, and after a few days you'll stop caring. Historians have documented that prison ship rations were theoretically regulated by the government, Each prisoner was supposed to receive a specific allotment of bread, meat, and beer or water. The reality, as with most things involving 18th century bureaucracy and human compassion, fell spectacularly short of the theory. Corruption was rampant. Ship captains and guards would skim rations to sell on the black market. What actually reached the prisoners was whatever was too rotten, too infested, or too worthless to sell elsewhere. Your beverage this morning is water, ladled from a barrel that's been sitting on deck for who knows how long. The water has a greenish tint and a distinct flavor profile you might describe as swamp with notes of decay. Small things float in it, debris definitely, and possibly organisms you don't want to examine too closely. You drink it anyway because the alternative is dying of thirst, and your body hasn't quite given up on survival yet. Some men claim the brackish water gives you diarrhea. Others claim clean water gives you diarrhea. Everything on a prison hulk gives you diarrhea, so the water quality seems almost beside the point. The weevils, you'll learn, are actually a sign of relatively fresh hardtack. When the biscuits are truly old, the weevils have long since died or moved on, leaving behind only dusty holes and the ghosts of nutrition past. If it's moving, it's still got some goodness in it, explains an old sailor with the philosophical air of a man who's made peace with degradation. There's actually a quirky debate among long-term prisoners about whether it's better to eat the weevils or tap them out. The tap them out faction argues for maintaining dignity. The eat them faction argues for calories. You'll eventually join the latter group because dignity is a luxury you can't afford on about 800 calories a day. Lunch, when it comes, is somehow even more depressing. Today, it's a chunk of salt pork that's been sitting in brine for so long it's achieved a texture somewhere between leather and stone. The meat is gray, streaked with yellow fat, and has a smell that's almost weaponized. You're supposed to cook it technically. There's a communal fire on deck during the day where prisoners can heat their rations. But the meat is so preserved, so salted, so fundamentally hostile to palatability that cooking it just makes it tougher. You gnaw on your portion, working at it like a dog with a particularly stubborn bone. The salt content is extraordinary. Your lips crack and bleed, your tongue swells, and within minutes you're desperately thirsty again. Which is actually the point, Thomas explains. The salt makes you crave water, and water is controlled by the guards. It's one more tiny way they maintain power over your body and will. Some men have developed techniques for making the salt pork edible. They'll soak it in seawater, yes, adding salt to remove salt, the logic is questionable, or pound it with rocks to tenderize it, or trade it to other prisoners for their hardtack, doubling down on weevil consumption. One entrepreneurial prisoner near the bow has fashioned a crude grater from a piece of scrap metal and will grate your salt pork into something approaching edibility in exchange for favors or a portion of your ration. The prison economy is complex and ruthless. Dinner, the final meal, varies wildly depending on the day, the guard's mood, and how much of the official ration has been stolen before reaching you. On a good day, you might get a thin gruel made from oats or peas, watery but warm, almost comforting in its blandness. On a bad day, you get nothing, told the supply ship didn't come or the stores ran short or some other excuse that means you'll go to sleep hungry. Again, the gruel, when it appears, is served in a communal bucket. Men dip their personal containers, wooden bowls, tin cups, cupped hands, into the lukewarm slop and slurp it down immediately before someone can jostle them and spill it. The gruel contains things you try not to think about: unidentifiable chunks, suspicious textures, the occasional insect. You eat it anyway, scraping every drop from your bowl because this might be your only hot meal of the week. Historians still argue whether the starvation on prison hulks was deliberate policy or bureaucratic indifference, but from where you're sitting, gnawing on weevil-infested hardtack, the distinction seems academic. The result is the same: chronic, grinding hunger that never quite goes away, that makes you dream of food, that turns your stomach into a cramping, angry organ staging a continuous protest against your circumstances. The vitamin deficiencies hit within weeks. Scurvy is the obvious one. Without fresh fruits or vegetables, your gums start to bleed, your teeth loosen, old wounds reopen. Thomas shows you his mouth, pulling back his lips to reveal gums that are swollen and purple, bleeding freely. "Lost 2 teeth last month," he says, poking at a gap with his tongue. "You'll lose some too. Everyone does." The prison doctor, and we'll use the term doctor very loosely here, occasionally distributes lemon juice or vinegar to combat scurvy, but the doses are too small and too irregular to make much difference. Pellagra, caused by niacin deficiency, turns your skin scaly and your mind confused. Beriberi from lack of thiamine makes your legs swell and your heart race. Rickets, even in adult men, softens bones already weakened by inactivity and poor nutrition. You're essentially experiencing every deficiency disease medical science has identified, all at once like a textbook come to horrifying life. The hunger becomes its own entity, a constant companion that colors every thought. You'll find yourself fantasizing about food with an intensity that's almost sexual. You'll dream of roast beef and fresh bread, of apples and cheese, of your mother's cooking or a tavern meal or literally anything that isn't hardtack and salt pork. You'll wake from these dreams to the reality of your wooden platform and want to cry, except crying takes energy you don't have. The survival strategies around food become increasingly creative and desperate. Some men save their rations, hoarding hardtack under their sleeping platforms, building little food stores like squirrels preparing for winter. This rarely ends well. The rats find these caches and devour them, or other prisoners steal them, or the stored food becomes so moldy it's inedible even by prison Hulk standards, which is saying something. Others try to supplement their rations by catching rats. Yes, you read that right. Rat meat, when you're starving, starts to look like a viable food source. The trick is catching them without getting bitten, which is harder than it sounds because Hulk rats are smart, fast, and mean. But some of the sailors have rigged traps using string and bits of hardtack as bait. A successfully caught rat can be roasted over the communal fire and divided among a small group. You haven't participated in a rat feast yet, but you've only been here a few days. Give it time. Desperation is patient. There's a black market, naturally. Guards can be bribed to bring in extra food, fresh bread, meat pies, fruit, but the prices are extortionate, paid in money prisoners don't have or in favors you don't want to think about. Some men have families on shore who bring food during visiting days, which happen irregularly and only if the guards feel like allowing it. You have no family coming, no money for bribes. You have what the system provides and nothing more. The communal fire on deck, where prisoners cook during the day, becomes a social hub. Men gather around the warmth, such as it is, trading gossip and ration preparation tips like gourmets discussing wine. If you char the salt pork black, it's almost like regular meat, one man advises. The weevils taste nuttier if you toast the hardtack first, another claims. These conversations would be hilarious if they weren't tragic, if these men weren't genuinely trying to find meaning and small pleasures in literal garbage food. You learn that the quality of rations varies by season. Summer brings slightly fresher supplies because ships can travel more reliably. Winter means everything sits in storage longer, getting moldier, more infested, more rotten. The salt pork you're eating now in autumn was probably packed last spring, has been sitting in brine for 6 months, and will taste even worse by January. Some prisoners have turned ration consumption into a kind of performance art. Old Benjamin, a pickpocket who's been on the Hulk for 5 years, has developed an elaborate ritual of examining each weevil before eating it, naming them, and thanking them for their sacrifice. It's either brilliant coping mechanism or complete madness. Maybe both. This one's called George, he says, holding up a particularly fat larva. Hello, George. Thank you for your service. Then he pops it in his mouth and chews thoughtfully. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry. The water situation deserves special mention because it's somehow worse than the food. That barrel on deck? It's filled weekly, maybe, with water drawn from the Thames. The Thames in 1778 is essentially an open sewer, filled with human waste, industrial runoff, dead animals, and God knows what else. The water is purified by storing it in wooden barrels, which does absolutely nothing except give it a woody flavor to accompany the sewage notes. Some men try to improve their water by adding vinegar, which at least kills some of the organisms swimming in it. Others strain it through cloth, which removes visible chunks but not the microscopic horrors. The smartest prisoners try to collect rainwater, setting out cups and bowls when it storms, but the guards often confiscate these, claiming it's escape attempt equipment or some other nonsense excuse for petty cruelty. The thirst is worse than the hunger sometimes. You can ignore hunger for a while, but thirst grabs your attention and doesn't let go. Your mouth dries out, your tongue swells, your thoughts get fuzzy. And the only solution is that greenish barrel water that probably contains more diseases than a medical textbook. You drink it anyway. You always drink it anyway. Thomas tells you about the Great Diarrhea Epidemic of '76, when contaminated water hit the Hulk and half the prisoners spent a week evacuating their souls through their bowels. The Parliament corner was so overwhelmed they just gave up and let people use the deck. And the smell, he says with the distant look of a war veteran, was indescribable. You believe him. Your body is already changing. You can feel it. The constant hunger is reshaping your metabolism, teaching your cells to operate on starvation rations. You're losing weight. You'll lose a third of your body weight within 6 months if you survive that long. Your muscles are atrophying from disuse and lack of protein. Your skin is taking on a grayish pallor from vitamin deficiencies and lack of sunlight. You're becoming a Hulk person, physically transformed by this environment into something less than what you were. But here's the thing about survival on minimal rations. The human body is astonishingly adaptable. Men live on this Hulk for years on food that should kill them within months. They don't thrive, God no, but they survive, shuffling through days in a state of chronic starvation that becomes the new normal. Your body will learn to extract every possible calorie from weevil-infested hardtack. Your gut bacteria will evolve to handle the toxic water. You'll become a lean, mean, surviving machine, albeit a miserable one. You finish your dinner gruel, scraping the bowl with your finger to get every last bit, and realize you're still hungry. You'll always be hungry. That's the secret they don't tell you about prison Hulks. The punishment isn't confinement or labor or even disease. It's hunger. Constant, gnawing, never-satisfied hunger that reduces you to an animal, thinking only of the next meal, the next mouthful, the next chance to put something, anything, into your empty stomach. Welcome to dinner on the Hulk. The weevils are complimentary. The first time you see a man die, it's almost anticlimactic. You've been on the Hulk for a week now, and you've heard the coughing, the moaning, the increasingly desperate prayers, but somehow you've managed to convince yourself that death is something that happens to other people, not to the man sleeping 3 feet from you. His name was Robert. You learned that much during the few semi-coherent conversations he managed before the fever took hold. He was a forger, caught printing fake banknotes, and he'd been on the Hulk for 8 months. 8 months of weevil-infested hardtack and brackish water and breathing air that was more disease than oxygen. His body, already weakened by malnutrition, didn't stand a chance when the fever arrived. It starts with a cough. Everyone coughs on the Hulk, the air quality alone guarantees that, but Robert's cough is different. Wet, deep, productive in the worst possible way. Within 2 days, he's burning up, delirious, calling for his mother and his wife in the same breath, confusing the present with memories 20 years old. Thomas watches him with the detached interest of a man who's seen this play out dozens of times. Typhus, probably, he says, scratching at a louse bite on his neck. Or jail fever. Same thing, really. Could be typhoid. Hard to tell until they're dead. The distinction between typhus and typhoid seems academic when you're the one dying, but historians have spent considerable time documenting which diseases killed the most prisoners on 18th century Hulks. Typhus, spread by lice, was the big killer, called jail fever, because it thrived in the exact conditions you're currently experiencing. Overcrowding, poor hygiene, and lots of blood-sucking insects. Typhoid, spread through contaminated water and food, ran a close second. Then came dysentery, tuberculosis, smallpox, scurvy complications, and a host of other diseases that sound like a medieval death menu. Robert dies on his 3rd day of fever around dawn. One moment he's breathing ragged, shallow, but breathing, and the next moment he's not. The transition is so subtle you almost miss it. His chest just stops moving. His eyes, which have been half open and glassy for hours, don't change expression. He's simply gone, vacated, left the building. His body remains on the platform for another 6 hours because the guards don't come to remove corpses until their morning rounds. You spend those 6 hours lying 3 feet from a dead man, trying not to think about how his lice are probably already migrating to find new hosts, how his last breath is still floating in the air you're breathing, How you touched his shoulder yesterday trying to offer comfort, and now those same invisible organisms are probably colonizing your body. The proximity to death here is intimate and horrifying in ways you never imagined. When the guards finally come, they handle Robert's removal with the ceremonial dignity you'd give to removing trash. They grab his ankles, drag him to the ladder, and haul him up to the deck. You hear a splash a few minutes later. Thames burial, Thomas explains. They weight the bodies with stones and drop them overboard. Quick, efficient, no ceremony, no prayers unless the prisoners say them, which some do. You whisper something that might be a prayer for Robert, though you're not sure God listens to prayers originating from prison hulks. The diseases here aren't just medical conditions. They're entities, personalities, active participants in your daily life. Dysentery, for instance, is the cruelest. It hollows you out, turning your intestines into a war zone, forcing you to make dozens of humiliating trips to the Parliament corner while your body evacuates everything you've eaten and then some. Men with dysentery lose weight at terrifying speed, going from gaunt to skeletal within days. The smell of dysentery is distinct, acidic, wrong, the smell of a body consuming itself from the inside. Thomas points out the dysentery cases with the same casualness someone might identify birds at a park. That one's got it bad, he says, nodding toward a man curled in a ball near the stern. 2 days, maybe 3, before he joins Robert in the Thames. He's right. 2 days later, that man is gone, dragged up the ladder by his ankles while his messmates divide up his possessions. A spare shirt, a wooden spoon, treasures in this economy of nothing. Tuberculosis works slower but just as thoroughly. You recognize the TB cases by their coughs, that distinctive hack that brings up blood-flecked phlegm. They'll cough for months, getting progressively thinner, weaker, more translucent, until they're almost ghostly before they finally succumb. TB loves the Hulk environment. Poor nutrition, bad air, stressed immune systems, close quarters for transmission. It's basically a 5-star resort for Mycobacterium tuberculosis. The ship's doctor visits once a week, maybe. He's not really a doctor in any meaningful sense. More like a barber surgeon who drew the short straw for prison Hulk duty. He descends into the hold, takes one look at the groaning, coughing masses, and prescribes his standard treatment for everything. Bloodletting. Because obviously what malnourished, anemic prisoners need is less blood. The logic is impeccable if you're living in the Middle Ages, which medically speaking you basically are. You watch him work on a man with a high fever. The doctor produces a lancet, opens a vein in the patient's arm, and drains what looks like a pint of blood into a bowl. The patient, already weak, becomes visibly weaker. That'll balance the humors. The doctor declares with the confidence of a man who has no idea what he's talking about. The patient dies 2 days later. Historians still argue whether 18th century medicine killed more people than it saved. But from where you're sitting, watching the doctor pack up his bloodletting kit, the answer seems obvious. There's a quirky hierarchy to diseases on the Hulk. Scurvy is almost respectable, a deficiency disease, not contagious, just a consequence of the ration situation. Men with scurvy get sympathy and shared rations of whatever fresh food occasionally appears. Dysentery and fever, though, carry a stigma. People avoid you, don't want to sleep near you, act like disease is a moral failing rather than inevitable in these conditions. It's irrational. You're all breathing the same contaminated air, drinking the same toxic water, but humans are irrational creatures, especially terrified ones. The smallpox outbreak, when it comes, and it will come, Thomas assures you darkly, will be spectacular. Smallpox rips through confined populations like fire through dry timber. The pustules, the fever, the disfigurement, the death rate hovering around 30% for the unvaccinated. Some prisoners have been variolated or vaccinated before arriving, but most haven't. You haven't. You're sitting in a powder keg waiting for someone to light the match. The psychological impact of watching men die around you is harder to quantify than the physical diseases, but just as destructive. You're developing a detachment, a numbness, that scares you when you think about it, which you try not to do. Robert's death affected you. The second death, 3 days later, affected you less. By the 5th death, a boy barely 16 who called for his mother until his voice gave out, you feel almost nothing. Just a mild irritation that his platform is now available and wondering if you can move to it because it's slightly closer to a gun port. This is what the Hulk does to you. It doesn't just kill your body. It kills your capacity for empathy, your horror at death, your basic human responses to suffering. You're being trained systematically to view death as normal, as background noise, as just another event in the daily routine like rations or work details. The medical neglect is policy, not accident. The government knows the death rates on prison hulks. Records exist, reports are filed, committees occasionally convene to discuss the prison hulk problem. Nothing changes. The hulks are cheaper than building proper prisons, and if prisoners die, well, that solves the overcrowding problem, doesn't it? It's cost-effective genocide through bureaucratic indifference. Some diseases you've never heard of become intimately familiar. Ship fever is what the old sailors call typhus. The flux is dysentery. The white plague is tuberculosis. These poetic names don't make the diseases any less horrifying, but somehow naming them makes them feel slightly more manageable. Like if you can name a thing, you have some power over it. You don't, but humans are good at comforting lies. The infection situation is its own special nightmare. Any cut, scrape, or blister can become infected in this environment. The filth, the lack of clean water, the weakened immune systems, they all conspire against healing. You watch a man die from an infected foot blister. A blister, it starts small, gets red, swells, turns colors that feet shouldn't turn, spreads up his leg in red streaks, and within a week he's fevered and delirious and then dead. The lesson is clear. Avoid injury at all costs, because your body can't fight off infections anymore. The madness that accompanies some diseases is particularly disturbing. Men with high fevers hallucinate, scream, fight invisible enemies, speak in tongues. The guards chain them to beams if they're violent. Let them thrash and rave until the fever breaks or they die. You try to sleep through these episodes, covering your ears, but the sounds penetrate everything. A man convinced insects are eating him from the inside, clawing at his own skin until he bleeds. Another seeing demons, praying desperately to a god who seems to have abandoned this place entirely. Thomas tells you about the great sickness of 75, when a disease, nobody knows what exactly, killed 2/3 of the prisoners on a hulk in Portsmouth in under a month. They couldn't remove bodies fast enough, he says, his voice flat. Men were sleeping next to corpses for days. The smell, the fear. Some men went mad just from that, threw themselves overboard even though they were chained. You don't know if this story is true or prison legend, but it doesn't matter. It feels true, and that's terrifying enough. The preventive measures are laughable. Occasionally, guards will come through with buckets of vinegar, splashing it around like holy water at an exorcism. Vinegar, the universal 18th century cure-all, supposed to purify the air and prevent disease. It does neither, but it does make everything smell like a salad for a few hours, which is actually an improvement. Some prisoners swear by carrying small bags of herbs or wearing garlic around their necks. Placebo is powerful when it's all you have. You develop your own superstitious preventions. You avoid touching sick men. You wash your hands in seawater when you can. You pray even though you're not sure you believe anymore. You make deals with God. Let me survive this outbreak and I'll be better, do better, something better. God doesn't respond, but making the deals makes you feel like you have some agency, some control over whether you live or die. The worst part isn't the dying, though that's bad enough. It's the waiting to die. Every cough makes you wonder if this is it, if you're next. Every fever spike sends panic through your chest. You become hyper-aware of your body, cataloging every symptom, every ache, wondering if it's normal Hulk misery or the beginning of the end. The psychological torture of this constant low-level terror is exhausting. Some men embrace death, welcome it even. You hear them praying for release, for God to take them out of this suffering. The graduation room, that dark corner where the dying are moved, has men who've given up, who've stopped eating their rations, who just lie there waiting for the end. Nobody judges them. Everyone understands. The real question isn't why some men give up, but why the rest of you keep fighting when the odds are so clearly against survival. The statistics, if you knew them, would horrify you. On some hulks, the annual death rate exceeds 50%. That means if you stay here 2 years, there's a better than even chance you'll die. And that's just from disease. We haven't even factored in accidents, suicide, violence, or the dozens of other ways this place can kill you. You're not living on a prison ship, you're living in a slow-motion massacre. But here's the thing about human resilience. You adapt even to this. Your immune system, weakened as it is, develops some resistance to the constant barrage of pathogens. Your body learns to function in a state of chronic low-grade illness. You develop a sixth sense for which diseases are survivable and which are death sentences. You become a connoisseur of suffering, able to distinguish between 20 different types of coughs and what they signify. Tonight, a new man starts coughing, that wet, deep cough you've learned to recognize. You roll over on your platform, turning your back to him, and try to sleep. Tomorrow you'll be thirsty, hungry, covered in lice, and possibly diseased. But tonight, right now, you're alive. That's the bar now. Survival measured in hours, in days if you're lucky. Welcome to the disease ward that is the 18th century prison Hulk. Try not to breathe too deeply. You've been on the Hulk for 3 weeks now, and you're learning the most important survival skill of all. Reading people. Not their words, those are cheap and often lies, but their positions in the invisible hierarchy that governs every interaction below deck. This social structure is as rigid as any aristocratic court, just infinitely more brutal and with worse catering. At the top of the food chain are the old hands. Prisoners who've survived a year or more on the Hulk. They control the best sleeping spots near the gun ports, they get first access to rations, they decide disputes, and they run the various illegal enterprises that make life bearable or unbearable depending on which side of their favor you land. Thomas, your neighbor and reluctant mentor, is an old hand, which explains why he has that premium spot with actual airflow and why other prisoners defer to him with wary respect. Just below the old hands are the Navy men, former sailors who committed crimes while in service or deserted and got caught. They stick together with the fierce loyalty of men who share a common language and experience. They know ships, they know discipline, and they know violence. The Navy men control the area near the bow, and they've established a kind of mini-republic there with their own rules and hierarchy. You don't go into Navy territory unless invited, and you're never invited. Then there are the craftsmen, prisoners with useful skills. The man who can repair shoes, the one who can pick locks, ironic given where you are, the fellow who can write letters for the illiterate majority, the guy who somehow knows how to treat wounds better than the useless doctor. These men trade their skills for extra rations, protection, favors. They're valuable, which means they're relatively safe. You have no useful skills. You were a petty thief, not exactly a tradecraft that translates well to prison life. Below the craftsmen are the regulars. Men like you, ordinary criminals serving ordinary sentences, trying to keep their heads down and survive. You're interchangeable, forgettable, powerless. Your only asset is that you're young and relatively healthy, which means you can work and you're not immediately dying. This puts you in the vast middle of the hierarchy, neither protected nor specifically targeted. At the bottom are the unfortunates, the sick, the weak, the old, the mentally ill, and the new arrivals who don't learn the rules fast enough. These men are prey. They get their rations stolen, their sleeping spots taken, their possessions claimed by stronger prisoners. Some of them survive through the charity of others, but charity is rare currency here. Most just deteriorate until they die or get transported, whichever comes first. The pecking order reveals itself in 1,000 small interactions. When rations are distributed, old hands get theirs first and get to inspect the quality, trading up for better portions if they want. When someone new arrives and needs a sleeping spot, they get assigned whatever's left, usually in the dark interior or near the Parliament corner. When disputes arise, and they arise constantly, the old hands arbitrate, and their word is law because the alternative is chaos, and chaos gets everyone punished by the guards. You witness your first trial on day 22. A younger prisoner, maybe 17, is accused of stealing another man's ration. The evidence is circumstantial. He was seen near the victim's sleeping area, and he doesn't have a solid alibi. But in this court, circumstantial is enough. 3 old hands convene, hear testimony from witnesses who may or may not be telling the truth, and render their verdict. Guilty. The punishment is brutal and instructive. The boy is held down by Navy men while another prisoner, a massive forger named Silas who serves as the unofficial enforcer, beats him with a wooden plank. Not enough to kill, that would be wasteful, but enough to ensure he won't steal again and to send a message to everyone else. You watch because not watching would mark you as squeamish, as weak, as someone who doesn't understand how things work here. The boy's screams echo through the hull. The guards on deck above don't intervene. They never do. Prisoner-on-prisoner violence is self-governance as far as they're concerned. Thomas explains the logic later. The guards don't care what we do to each other as long as we show up for work details and don't try to escape. So we police ourselves. It's harsh, but it's better than chaos. Trust me, I've seen chaos. This is better. You're not sure you agree, but you're not in a position to argue. The boy survives his beating, barely, and becomes a cautionary tale. Don't steal. Don't break the rules. The old hands are watching. The social hierarchy extends to every aspect of life. There's a tax system where old hands claim a portion of newcomers' rations for the first month. Protection money. Essentially, though protection from what is never explicitly stated. You pay because everyone pays, because refusing would mark you as rebellious, which is a death sentence in this environment. Your already meager portions get even smaller, and the hunger intensifies, but you're buying survival, or at least a chance at it. Some prisoners establish themselves through violence, proving they're dangerous enough to be left alone. You watch a new arrival, a stocky butcher convicted of assault, put down 3 other prisoners in his first week. Just casual, brutal displays of force that establish boundaries. After that, people give him space, respect, fear. He ascends the hierarchy quickly, not to old hand status, that requires time, but to a position of wary respect. Violence, you're learning, is a language everyone here speaks fluently. Others navigate the hierarchy through different means. There's a prisoner everyone calls the banker who runs a lending operation, trading rations now for promises of rations later, charging interest that would make a London moneylender blush. He's small, physically weak, but he's smart and he keeps meticulous mental records of who owes what. People don't mess with the banker because he provides a service, and services have value. Plus, his ledger is backed by Silas the Enforcer, which helps. The sexual politics of the Hulk are dark and mostly unspoken. There are younger prisoners, boys really, who attach themselves to older, stronger men for protection. The nature of these relationships varies. Some are genuinely protective, almost paternal. Others are exploitative in ways that make your stomach turn. Nobody talks about it directly, but everyone knows. The guards know too, and they don't care. One more way the strong dominate the weak, one more reason to never appear vulnerable. You learn to navigate this landscape carefully. You defer to old hands, giving them the respect that maintains order. You avoid the Navy men's territory. You're polite to the craftsmen, never demanding, always grateful when they provide services. You keep your head down around the violent prisoners, making no eye contact that could be interpreted as challenge. You're learning to be invisible, to slip through the social structure without attracting attention from anyone dangerous. But invisibility has its costs. When a dispute breaks out near your sleeping area, 2 men fighting over a gambling debt, you're expected to choose sides or at least bear witness. Neutrality is suspicious, implies you think you're above the community, too good to involve yourself in its affairs. You back the man Thomas backs, not because you care about the dispute, but because aligning yourself with an old hand provides cover. The gambling itself is fascinating. Men betting rations, clothing, future labor on dice games and card games using decks so worn you can identify cards by their damage patterns. Some men gamble away their food and slowly starve. Others accumulate winnings and grow stronger, healthier, more powerful. This capitalism in microcosm, red in tooth and claw, Darwin's theory playing out on a rotting ship deck. There are gangs, loose affiliations based on geography, crime type, or just personal loyalty. The London boys are thieves and pickpockets from the city, watching each other's backs. The country men are rural criminals, bound by their shared distrust of city folk. The politicals, men convicted of sedition or speaking against the king, form their own intellectual circle, discussing philosophy and rights while literally covered in lice. Each gang provides protection, identity, purpose in a place designed to strip those things away. You're approached by the London boys in your fourth week. They know you're from the city, know you were a thief. They're recruiting, building numbers, and they want you to join. It's presented as an invitation, but you understand it's really a test. Join and you get protection, community, a place in the hierarchy. Refuse and you mark yourself as outside the system, which makes you vulnerable. You accept because the alternative is worse, and just like that, you're part of something larger than yourself. It doesn't feel good, exactly, but it feels safer. Being part of a gang means obligations. You share rations with gang members who are sick or weak. You back them in disputes, even if they're clearly wrong. You participate in enforcement actions against rule breakers or rival gang members. You're becoming complicit in the brutality you once observed with horror, and the ease of this transformation terrifies you when you let yourself think about it. The guards manipulate these hierarchies expertly. They'll punish entire sections of the hull for one man's infraction, knowing the prisoners will police themselves afterward. They'll give privileges to certain old hands, making them de facto administrators who maintain order on the guards' behalf. It's brilliant, really. Let the prisoners oppress each other, save yourself the effort, and if things go wrong, blame the prisoners. The system is designed to turn victims into victimizers. Historians still argue whether the informal prisoner hierarchies on prison hulks were spontaneous self-organization or deliberately cultivated by authorities. But from inside the system, the origin doesn't matter. The hierarchy exists, it's real, and it determines whether you eat or starve, live or die, maintain your humanity or descend into something darker. You witness the hierarchy enforce itself when a mentally ill prisoner, a man who talks to people who aren't there and sometimes screams in the night, becomes too disruptive. The old hands convene, decide he's disturbing the peace, and sentence him to isolation. He's moved to the furthest, darkest corner of the hull, separated from the general population by an informal but absolute boundary. No one speaks to him, shares with him, acknowledges his existence. He's alive but socially dead. Within 2 weeks, he's actually dead, and nobody's sure if it was disease, starvation, suicide, or just giving up. Nobody asks. The weak don't last long, and weakness can be physical, mental, or social. An old man, convicted of fraud, arrives and immediately fails to integrate. He's educated, speaks properly, looks down on the other prisoners with barely concealed disgust. The hierarchy eats him alive. His rations are lost. His sleeping spot gets taken. He's beaten for imagined slights. Within a month, he's broken, crying, begging for mercy that doesn't come. He dies of dysentery, but really he died of being unable to adapt to the social environment. You're adapting, though, and that realization hits you one night with uncomfortable clarity. You're learning to think like a Hulk prisoner, calculating social dynamics, assessing threats, finding angles for survival. When a new arrival gets your old sleeping spot and doesn't immediately pay the ration tax, you feel annoyance that he's breaking the rules, disrupting the order. 6 weeks ago, you would have felt sympathy. Now you feel irritation that he's not playing the game correctly. This is what the Hulk does. It rewrites your moral code, reshapes your priorities, turns you into a creature optimized for survival in hell. You're not proud of what you're becoming, but pride is another luxury you can't afford. The hierarchy is harsh, often cruel, sometimes evil, but it's also the structure that keeps total chaos at bay, that provides just enough order to make survival possible. Thomas tells you about the revolts that sometimes happen when the hierarchy breaks down, when old hands die too quickly and leadership vacuums emerge, or when conditions deteriorate so badly that men have nothing left to lose. Pure chaos, he says, shaking his head. Everyone against everyone, no rules, no structure. The guards put it down eventually, brutally, and the survivors are worse off than before. The hierarchy is cruel, but it's better than the alternative. You lie on your platform that night, listening to the sounds of the hull snoring, coughing, the scratch of rats, the creak of wood. Somewhere an old hand is settling a dispute, his voice calm and authoritative. Somewhere a newcomer is learning the rules the hard way. Somewhere the hierarchy is enforcing itself, maintaining the brutal order that keeps this wooden hell from descending into something even worse. You're part of it now, complicit in its cruelties, dependent on its protections. The strong dominate the weak, and you're desperately trying to be strong enough to survive but not so strong you attract dangerous attention. It's a narrow path, and men fall off it every day. Welcome to the social dynamics of the prison hulk, where Darwin's theories meet Hobbes' state of nature, and the weak definitely don't inherit anything except an early grave in the Thames. The first time you witness a flogging, you're on your second month aboard the Hulk, and you've started to think maybe you understand how things work here. You've learned the hierarchy, you've paid your taxes to the old hands, you've kept your head down and your mouth shut. You're surviving. Then James, a young sailor who made the catastrophic error of talking back to a guard, gets dragged to the main deck at dawn, and you learn there's a whole other level of brutality you haven't encountered yet. The entire prisoner population is forced to witness. The guards march you up from below deck, blinking in the weak morning sunlight like moles emerging from tunnels. You're arranged in a semicircle on the deck, guards positioned to ensure nobody looks away. This is theater, you realize, punishment as performance, meant to educate through terror. James is stripped to the waist and tied to a grating that's been rigged upright. His arms are stretched above his head, wrists bound with rope that's already cutting into his skin. The captain of the guard reads the charges in a bored monotone. Insubordination, disrespect to authority, disrupting the peace. The sentence: 24 lashes with the cat o' nine tails. You've heard of the cat but never seen one. The guard who wields it, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, displays it almost lovingly before beginning. 9 knotted cords attached to a wooden handle, each cord designed to cut and tear rather than just bruise. It's an instrument of torture masquerading as a tool of discipline, and it's horrifyingly effective. The first lash makes a sound you'll never forget, a wet crack as the knotted cords bite into James's back. He screams, and you don't blame him because the sound alone makes your stomach churn. The guard counts aloud. 1. He draws back for the second strike, and you notice he's putting his whole body into it, pulling the cat back far enough that the cords whistle through the air before they land. By the 5th lash, James's back is a mess of blood and torn flesh. By the 10th, he stops screaming and is just whimpering, a broken sound that's somehow worse. By the 15th, he's unconscious, hanging limply from his bindings, and the guard continues anyway because orders are orders and mercy isn't part of the performance. When it's finally over, they untie James and let him drop to the deck like a sack of grain. The ship's doctor splashes seawater on the wounds, supposedly to prevent infection, though you suspect it's mainly to cause additional pain, a final insult to go with the injury. James is carried below deck by 2 prisoners and dumped on his platform, where he'll spend the next week lying on his stomach, his shredded back slowly festering because there's no real medical care, no clean bandages, nothing but time and his own immune system to determine if he survives. Thomas leans close as you shuffle back below deck, his voice barely a whisper. That was mild. I've seen men get 100 lashes. Seen the cat take flesh off in strips, expose bone. Some men die during it, hearts give out from the shock. Others die after from infection. James got off light, relatively speaking. The punishments on the Hulk exist on a spectrum from petty cruelty to outright torture, and the guards deploy them with the casual creativity of men who've been doing this job too long and have grown bored with routine brutality. For minor infractions, talking after lights out, not working fast enough on labor details, you might get reduced rations, meaning you're even hungrier than usual. Or you might get the box, a wooden coffin-sized container on the upper deck where you're locked for hours or days, unable to stand, sit comfortably, or lie down, just existing in cramped agony while sun or rain or cold works on you. For more serious infractions, fighting, stealing from guards, attempted escape, the punishments escalate. The flogging you witnessed is standard. Iron fetters, heavier and more restrictive than the standard chains, can be added to your ankles, making every movement exhausting and painful. Some men spend months in heavy irons for infractions real or imagined, their ankles rubbed raw and bleeding, their leg muscles atrophying from the constant strain. There's dancing the devil's hornpipe, a punishment where a prisoner is hung from the rigging by his wrists, with just his toes touching the deck. It sounds almost comical until you see it, until you watch a man hang there for hours, his shoulders slowly dislocating, his toes cramping and bleeding as he tries desperately to maintain contact with the deck to relieve the pressure on his arms. Men have permanent shoulder damage from this punishment, assuming they survive it. The guards have perfected the art of inflicting maximum pain while keeping prisoners technically alive and capable of work. A dead prisoner can't dredge rivers or build docks, so the punishments are calibrated, brutal enough to terrify, restrained enough to avoid creating too many corpses. It's a grim calculus, and the guards have had years to perfect their math. You learn the official rules quickly. No fighting among prisoners, no theft, no insubordination, no escape attempts, no destroying property, no refusing work. The actual enforcement of these rules is wildly inconsistent. Some guards ignore minor infractions while others punish them severely, depending on their mood, how much they've been drinking, whether they like your face. This randomness is part of the control mechanism. If you can't predict what will trigger punishment, you live in constant low-level fear, which keeps you compliant. There are unofficial rules too, enforced by both guards and prisoners. Don't look guards in the eye too long. That's challenging their authority. Don't move too quickly or too slowly. Both can be interpreted as suspicious. Don't ask questions about when you'll be transported or released. Don't complain about conditions, food, treatment. Don't show weakness, but also don't show too much strength. Navigate the impossible middle ground or suffer the consequences. The punishment for escape attempts is legendarily harsh, though escape attempts are rare because where would you go? You're chained, you're on a ship in the middle of a river or harbor, you're probably weak from malnutrition, and if you somehow made it to shore, you'd be a fugitive in a country with no sympathy for escaped prisoners. But some men try anyway, driven by desperation or madness or hope that dies hard. Thomas tells you about an escape attempt 2 years ago. 3 men managed to pick their locks, overpower a guard, and dive into the Thames. One drowned immediately because he couldn't swim, and nobody had thought to check that detail before launching the plan. The second made it about 50 yards before guards in a rowboat caught him. The third actually reached the shore but was captured within hours, because where do you hide when you're wearing prison clothing and everyone knows the hulks are missing a prisoner? The 2 who survived were brought back and made examples of. They received 100 lashes each. Flogging so severe that one man died during and the other died 2 days later from infection and trauma. Their bodies were displayed on deck for a full day before being dumped in the Thames, and the message was clear. Escape isn't just impossible. Attempting it is a death sentence delivered slowly and painfully. The psychological punishments are harder to quantify but equally devastating. Solitary confinement, when it's imposed, means being chained in the furthest, darkest corner of the hull with no human contact except when guards bring rations, if they remember. Men emerge from weeks of solitary broken in ways flogging can't achieve, talking to themselves, flinching at sounds, fundamentally altered by the isolation. There's also collective punishment, the guard's favorite tool of social engineering. One man breaks a rule, and the entire hull loses privileges. No deck time for a week, reduced rations for everyone, extra work details. This turns the prisoner population against rule breakers more effectively than any individual punishment could. You learn to hate the man who got everyone's rations reduced, to participate in informal prisoner-administered justice that's often harsher than what the guards would have done. Historians still argue whether the punishment regimes on prison hulks violated contemporary standards or were considered normal for the era, but contemporary accounts from reformers and physicians suggest even 18th century observers found the conditions shockingly brutal. Not that this knowledge led to meaningful reform. Ships continued operating this way for decades. You witness your first gauntlet on day 60. A prisoner caught stealing from the guard's supplies is sentenced to run between 2 rows of his fellow prisoners, while each man hits him with a rope or stick. It's medieval, tribal, and horrifyingly effective at creating community cohesion through shared violence. You participate because not participating marks you as sympathetic to thieves, as outside the community, as potentially next. You hit him, not hard, but you hit him, and you feel sick about it, but you do it anyway because survival requires compromises you never imagined making. The guards sometimes punish prisoners through deprivation of things you didn't realize were privileges until they're taken away. Deck time, those precious hours when you're allowed above to breathe fresh air and see the sky, can be revoked. The communal fire where you cook your salt pork can be forbidden. The weekly visit from family members, if you have family who'll brave the smell and horror of the hulk to see you, can be cancelled on a whim. Some guards are creative with their cruelty. There's one who enjoys making prisoners race while chained together, forcing them to shuffle run across the deck while he times them, beating the slowest man afterward. Another has a game where he throws prisoners' rations overboard and makes them beg for replacements, sometimes granting them, sometimes not, depending on how entertaining he finds the begging. The randomness of punishment is perhaps the cruelest aspect. You can follow every rule perfectly and still get punished because a guard woke up angry, because you remind someone of a prisoner they hated, because the moon is full and they're bored. This arbitrariness breaks something in men's minds. The human brain craves cause and effect, seeks patterns, wants to believe good behavior leads to good outcomes. The Hulk teaches you that the universe is chaos, that suffering is random, that your actions matter less than the whims of men with power over you. You watch James recover slowly from his flogging, his back a landscape of scars that'll mark him for life, assuming he has a life ahead of him. He's changed, quieter, more withdrawn, flinching when guards pass. The punishment worked in the sense that he'll never talk back again, but it broke something essential in him, transformed him from a spirited young sailor into a hollow-eyed man going through the motions of survival. There's a prisoner everyone calls the example. A man who attempted escape 3 years ago, survived the flogging, and now exists in a state of permanent punishment. He wears the heaviest irons, gets the smallest rations, sleeps in the worst spot, is forbidden deck time. He's alive but barely, a living reminder of what happens when you defy the system. The guards keep him alive deliberately, pointing him out to new arrivals. See that? That's what happens when you get ideas. The psychological weight of living under constant threat of arbitrary punishment is exhausting. You're always on edge, always calculating, always afraid. Every interaction with a guard is a potential trigger for violence. Every breath you take is measured against the possibility that it'll be your last free breath before you're tied to a grating and flogged. The anxiety becomes baseline, normal, just another sensation you're drowning in along with hunger and thirst and lice. Some men crack under the pressure and become what the prisoners call guards' pets. Informants who report on other prisoners in exchange for better treatment. These men are necessary for the system but despised by everyone. They sleep with one eye open because prisoner justice for informants is swift and brutal. You've seen informants found dead, officially from disease but obviously from something more deliberate. A pillow over the face, a shiv between the ribs, a convenient accident during a work detail. The guards encourage this informant system, protect some informants while letting others get caught and punished by prisoners, maintaining chaos and distrust that prevents organization or rebellion. If you can't trust the man sleeping next to you, you can't organize resistance. This brilliant strategy and moral horror all wrapped together. You're learning to navigate this landscape of violence and control, developing instincts for when to be visible and when to disappear, when to speak and when to stay silent, when to show emotion and when to become a blank slate that gives guards nothing to react to. You're becoming institutionalized, shaped by this environment into something that can survive it, and the cost is pieces of who you were before. The punishment system isn't about justice. It's about control through fear, about breaking spirits while maintaining bodies capable of labor, about creating a population so terrified and traumatized that rebellion becomes unthinkable. And it works. You watch it work every day. Watch men who might have fought back in the outside world become docile, beaten, obedient. Tonight you lie on your platform, listening to James whimper in his sleep as his healing back spasms with pain, and you promise yourself you'll never give the guards a reason to tie you to that grating. You'll follow every rule, spoken and unspoken. You'll be invisible, forgettable, completely compliant. This is how they win. This is how they break you. Not through one dramatic punishment, but through the constant threat of it, the randomness of it, the knowledge that pain can arrive at any moment for any reason or no reason at all. Welcome to the punishment regime of the 18th century prison Hulk, where cruelty is policy and mercy is a fairy tale told to children who've never seen a cat o' nine tails draw blood. It's day 93, you think. You've been keeping count by scratching marks into a beam near your sleeping platform, but lately you've noticed some marks you don't remember making, and there are gaps in your memory where days just vanished, dissolved into the monotonous horror of Hulk existence. Time down here doesn't flow normally. It pools and stagnates like the bilge water, creating pockets where hours feel like days and weeks disappear in what seems like moments. The darkness is doing things to your mind. Not the physical darkness, you've adjusted to that, your eyes learning to function in the perpetual twilight of the lower deck. It's the psychological darkness, the absence of anything resembling hope or future or meaning. You're starting to understand why some men talk to themselves, why others have conversations with people who aren't there, why the example sometimes laughs at nothing for minutes on end. You've started having dreams that blend seamlessly with waking reality. Last night, or was it 3 nights ago? You had an entire conversation with your mother, felt her hand on your forehead, heard her voice telling you everything would be fine. When you woke, the disappointment was crushing, physically painful in your chest. Thomas found you weeping and didn't ask why because he understands. Everyone here has ghosts they talk to, memories that visit like specters, dreams more real than the wooden platform beneath them. The loss of self is gradual but inexorable. You used to have a name, an identity, a history that defined you. Now you're just a number, a ration count, a body that performs labor and takes up space. The guards don't know your name. They call you there, or prisoner, or nothing at all. Just point and expect compliance. Even the other prisoners mostly refer to each other by nicknames or crimes rather than actual names. You're the thief to some, London to others, and increasingly, you have trouble remembering who you were before you became these labels. Your sense of time has completely deteriorated. Sometimes you're convinced you've been here for years, that your entire life before the Hulk was a dream. Other times you're certain it's only been days, that surely not much time has passed, that the world outside is still waiting for you. Thomas tells you it's been 3 months. But what does Thomas know? He thinks he's been here for 3 years, but maybe he's been here for 3 weeks or 3 decades. Time is meaningless in the belly of a rotting ship. The sensory deprivation is murderous. Below deck, there's almost nothing to look at. The same wooden beams, the same platforms, the same prisoners in the same spots doing the same things. No colors except browns and grays. No visual variety. Your brain, starved for stimulation, starts creating its own. You see patterns in the wood grain, faces in the shadows, movement in the corners of your vision that disappears when you look directly at it. Sound becomes both your anchor and your torment. The constant creaking of the ship, the drip of water, the scratching of rats, the coughing and moaning of prisoners. These sounds create a sonic landscape that invades your dreams, becomes the backdrop to every thought. Sometimes the sounds seem to form words, sentences, conversations in a language you almost understand but not quite. You're going mad, probably, but madness and sanity have become such flexible concepts that the distinction hardly matters. Historians still argue whether the psychological damage from prison Hulk confinement was understood by contemporary authorities, but personal accounts from released prisoners describe symptoms we'd now recognize as severe PTSD, depression, dissociation, and psychotic breaks. You're living those statistics, becoming a case study in what happens to the human mind when you strip away everything that makes existence bearable. There's a man 3 platforms down who hasn't spoken in 6 weeks. He eats his rations mechanically, performs his work details in complete silence, returns to his platform and stares at the ceiling for hours. His eyes are open but nobody's home. He's gone somewhere inside himself where the Hulk can't reach him, and maybe that's the smartest survival strategy of all. You're starting to understand the appeal of just checking out mentally, letting your consciousness retreat to some protected inner space while your body goes through the motions. The philosophical prisoners, those politicals who were convicted of sedition, try to maintain their sanity through intellectual exercises. You hear them debating Locke and Hobbes in the darkness, discussing natural rights and social contracts while literally living in the state of nature Hobbes described. Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. There's something darkly funny about men in chains debating human freedom, but they cling to these discussions like lifelines, using philosophy to maintain their sense of self even as the Hulk works to erase it. You've developed coping mechanisms that might be considered mental illness in any other context, but here are just adaptive responses. You've created an imaginary companion, not consciously, it just happened, a version of yourself from before the Hulk who comments on what you're experiencing. This is quite bad, he observes mildly when you're eating weevil-infested hardtack. We probably shouldn't be here. he notes during a flogging. This dissociation, this internal observer, helps you maintain some distance from the horror, but it also means you're splitting into multiple people, fragmenting under the pressure. The loss of privacy destroys something fundamental in the human psyche. You haven't been alone, truly alone, in 3 months. Every bodily function happens in proximity to other men. You defecate in front of strangers. You cry in front of strangers. You wake from nightmares screaming, and hands reach out to quiet you not from kindness, but because your noise disturbs everyone else. The constant presence of other suffering humans should be comforting, but it's not. It's invasive, suffocating, a reminder that even your mental breakdown is a public performance. Some men retreat into religion, and you understand why. If this existence is God's plan, if there's meaning in the suffering, if heaven awaits the faithful, then maybe you can endure. The evening prayers that echo through the hull, desperate, bargaining prayers, are less about faith than about manufacturing hope from nothing. Please God, let me see my children again. Lord, give me strength for one more day. Father, just let me die. The prayers blend together into a hymn of despair, and sometimes you join in, mumbling words you don't believe to a God you're not sure exists, because what else is there to do? You've started experiencing what Thomas calls the gaps. Moments where you simply cease to exist consciously. You're eating hardtack, and then suddenly you're on a work detail with no memory of the transition. You're lying on your platform at night, and then it's morning, and you have no recollection of the hours between. At first this terrified you, but now you're almost grateful because the gaps mean less time being consciously present in hell. The suicides are almost understandable. You've witnessed 3 in your time here. Men who just couldn't take another day and found ways to end it despite the constant surveillance and lack of privacy. One hanged himself from a beam using strips of torn clothing. Another drowned himself in the water barrel, holding himself under with determined strength until his body stopped fighting. The third cut his wrists with a piece of broken glass he'd somehow hidden and slowly bled out while pretending to sleep. The guards punish suicide attempts if you survive them, flogging a man for trying to escape his misery through death, which is such perfectly circular cruelty that you'd laugh if you had the energy. But you understand both the impulse to end it and the survival instinct that keeps most men from following through. Every day you wake up is a choice to continue existing, and some days that choice feels heroic and other days it feels like cowardice. You're too afraid of death to choose it, so you continue suffering by default. The hallucinations are becoming more frequent. You see things that aren't there, food, mostly elaborate meals spread on imaginary tables. Sometimes you see the door of your childhood home, so real you could walk through it, and you have to remind yourself it's not real, it's your brain malfunctioning from stress and malnutrition and sensory deprivation. Other prisoners have similar experiences. Men reaching for objects that don't exist, talking to visitors who haven't come, describing scenes from lives they may or may not have actually lived. There's a peculiar phenomenon the old hands call the forgetting, where prisoners lose chunks of their previous lives, memories just evaporating like water in sun. You've noticed it in yourself. There are parts of your childhood you can't quite access anymore, people whose faces have blurred, events you know happened but can't actually remember experiencing. The Hulk is consuming your past, erasing who you were, leaving you with only the present moment of suffering and a future that's either non-existent or unimaginably far away. The psychological torture of not knowing how long you'll be here is perhaps the cruelest element. Transportation to Australia could happen next week, next year, never. You could die tomorrow from disease or violence or accident. You could spend decades on this rotting ship, aging into one of the hollow-eyed old men who've become part of the hull's architecture. The uncertainty is actively crazy-making, preventing you from mentally preparing for anything because anything might happen or nothing might happen. You've developed rituals to impose structure on chaos, touching certain beams in certain orders, counting to specific numbers before eating, arranging your few possessions in exact configurations. These rituals are technically irrational, but rationality is a luxury for people living in rational circumstances. Here, your small ceremonies create islands of control in an ocean of helplessness, and if that's magical thinking, so be it. Magic is all you have. The identity dissolution accelerates when you realize you're starting to forget what you look like. There are no mirrors on the Hulk, no reflective surfaces where you can check your appearance. You run your hands over your face and feel bones you don't remember being so prominent, skin that feels different, hair growing in patterns that seem wrong. You're changing physically, losing weight, developing scars, aging rapidly, and without visual confirmation, you're not sure who you're becoming. Thomas tells you about prisoners who completely lose touch with reality, who believe they're still free, who have elaborate delusions about their lives outside the hulk. One man spent 6 months convinced he was a ship's captain, giving orders to imaginary crew members, navigating imaginary voyages. The guards let him continue because he was harmless and occasionally entertaining. He died believing he'd sailed around the world, which is either tragic or a beautiful mercy depending on how you look at it. You're aware enough to recognize your own deterioration, which is its own special torture. You know you're not thinking clearly, that your grip on reality is loosening, that the person you were is dying by degrees. But knowing this doesn't stop it from happening. You're a conscious observer of your own psychological dissolution, watching yourself come apart like a ship in a storm, unable to stop the process but painfully aware it's occurring. The nightmares have become more vivid than waking life. You dream of drowning, of being buried alive, of endless falling, of searching for something you can never find. You dream you're free and wake to chains. You dream you're dead and wake to realize death would be preferable to this. The boundary between sleeping and waking has become permeable, and sometimes you're not sure which state you're in, which reality is real, if any of them are. There's a moment you can't place when it happened exactly, where you realize you're having a conversation with yourself out loud and several prisoners are staring at you with expressions mixing pity and recognition. You've become one of them, one of the talkers, the men who've retreated so far into their own heads that the internal has become external. You should be embarrassed, but embarrassment requires caring about others' opinions, and you're not sure you do anymore. The psychological breaking point isn't dramatic. There's no moment where you snap, no clear before and after. It's gradual erosion, like water wearing away stone, until one day you realize you've forgotten why you wanted to survive, what you're surviving for, who you're trying to remain. The you that entered this hulk 3 months ago is dead. What remains is something else. A creature adapted to darkness and deprivation, functioning but fundamentally broken, going through the motions of existence because stopping requires more energy than continuing. Tonight you lie on your platform and try to remember your mother's face. You can't. You try to recall your childhood home. The image is blurry, fragmentary, possibly entirely fabricated by a desperate mind. You try to feel hope for the future. There's nothing there, just an empty space where hope used to live before the hulk consumed it. This is what the prison ship does to your mind. It doesn't just confine your body. It systematically dismantles your sanity, your identity, your basic sense of self, leaving you a hollow vessel going through the motions of survival without remembering why survival matters. Welcome to the psychological breakdown, where the worst prison is the one inside your own fracturing mind. The escape attempts are legends whispered between prisoners in the darkness, stories that probably grew with each retelling but persist because men need to believe freedom is possible even when all evidence suggests otherwise. Thomas tells you about the most famous attempt, the one that actually succeeded at least partially, late one night when neither of you can sleep due to the man in graduation room whose death rattle has been going on for hours. It was 5 years ago, Thomas says, on a hulk moored at Portsmouth. 7 prisoners managed to coordinate an escape over weeks of planning. They'd collected pieces of metal, scraps of wood, stolen tools from work details, building a toolkit hidden in the hull's dark corners. They picked their locks, overpowered a sleeping guard, and made it to the water just before dawn. 3 drowned immediately. The cold and current were worse than they'd anticipated, and manacles make terrible swimming accessories even if you've removed them. 2 were caught within hours, brought back, and flogged to death as examples. But 2, and this is the part that gives the story its power, its dangerous hope, 2 actually made it. 1 was never recaptured, supposedly made it to Ireland and started a new life. The other was caught 6 months later in London, but still, 6 months of freedom. 6 months of breathing free air, eating real food, sleeping in beds, being human again. Probably horseshit, Thomas admits. But maybe not. And maybe not is sometimes enough to keep you alive another day. The reality of escape from a prison hulk is mathematically grim. You're chained. You're malnourished and weak. You're surrounded by water you probably can't swim across even if you weren't wearing iron. The shore is patrolled. The guards have boats. If you somehow make it to land, you're wearing prison clothes marked with broad arrows, you have no money, you probably have scurvy and dysentery, and the entire countryside knows to watch for escaped prisoners. But men try anyway because the alternative is dying slowly in the dark, and at least an escape attempt offers the possibility of dying quickly while doing something, taking action, refusing to submit. There's dignity in that, or what passes for dignity when you're covered in lice and haven't seen sunlight in months. You hear about smaller, less coordinated attempts all the time. A prisoner who jumped overboard during a work detail and was shot before he swam 20 yards. 2 men who tried to rush the guards during ration distribution and were beaten unconscious. A boy who attempted to hide in a supply barrel during loading and suffocated before the barrel even left the ship. These aren't escape attempts so much as suicide with extra steps. Death chosen over continued existence on the Hulk. The guards have systems to prevent escape that are depressingly effective. Random head counts throughout the day and night. Chains inspected regularly for signs of tampering. Work details always supervised by armed guards. The ship itself is designed to prevent escape. The gun ports are barred, the hatches are locked. There are no ropes hanging over the side. Nothing to aid a prisoner trying to leave. There's also the informant network. The guards' pets who report on any whisper of escape, planning in exchange for extra rations or lighter punishment. You've learned to be paranoid about what you say and who hears it. That conversation about missing the outside world could be interpreted as escape planning. That question about the distance to shore? Suspicious. Even the stories about past escapes are dangerous. Why are you so interested unless you're planning something? Thomas tells you about a planned escape he almost joined 3 years ago. A group of 10 prisoners spent months gathering materials, picking locks, studying guard routines. They had a plan, detailed, thoughtful, with contingencies. Then one prisoner, desperate for better treatment, informed the guards. The entire group was flogged, put in heavy irons, and moved to the worst positions in the hull. That's when I learned, Thomas says, that hoping for escape is more dangerous than not hoping at all. But there are survivors, rare as they are. Men who endured the hulks and lived to tell about it, though lived is perhaps overstating it. You've heard stories of prisoners who were eventually transported to Australia, survived the voyage, which is its own nightmare we won't even get into, and built lives in the colony. Some even prospered, found redemption, died free if not particularly happy. Historians have documented that transportation to Australia did eventually resume, becoming the primary method of dealing with Britain's convicted criminals. Tens of thousands of prisoners were shipped to New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land between the 1780s and 1860s. Many died during the voyage, disease, malnutrition, violence, but some survived, and of those who survived, some actually built decent lives in the colony. You try to hold on to this possibility, that transportation might come, that you might survive the voyage, that you might somehow emerge from this nightmare into something resembling a life. But the timeline is unknowable. Transportation could happen next month or next decade. You could be on the first ship or die before your name is called. The uncertainty is its own torture. There are stories of pardons too, though these are rare enough to be practically mythological. A prisoner whose innocence was proven. Another whose family had connections and bribed the right officials. A third who performed some service for the crown and was rewarded with freedom. These stories circulate like fairy tales because that's essentially what they are. Beautiful lies that help men sleep at night. The man closest to escaping in your time on the Hulk is actually the example, which adds cruel irony to his continued suffering. He nearly made it. Got his chains off, overpowered a guard, swam halfway to shore before guards in a rowboat caught him. He was strong then, healthy, determined. Now he's broken, kept alive as a warning but barely alive, a ghost haunting his own body. His escape attempt was 3 years ago. He's been paying for it every day since. You sometimes fantasize about escape despite knowing it's futile. In your mind, you pick the locks with a piece of wire you'll somehow acquire. You slip past the guards at exactly the right moment. You swim to shore with powerful strokes, ignoring that you can barely swim even when you're not starving and chained. You run through the English countryside, somehow evading capture, and disappear into London's slums or board a ship to America or just vanish into a new life where the Hulk is a memory that fades with time. These fantasies are dangerous. They give you hope, and hope makes continued suffering harder to bear. Better to accept that you're here until you're transported or dead, that escape is impossible, that this is your life now. Acceptance brings a kind of peace, however miserable. Hope brings anguish when reality inevitably crushes it. The survival statistics for Hulk prisoners are grim but not hopeless. Records suggest maybe 60 to 70% of prisoners eventually left the Hulks through transportation rather than death, though the journey to Australia had its own significant mortality rate. So maybe you have better than even odds of surviving to see transportation. Maybe. Thomas is your best evidence for survival possibility. He's been here 3 years and he's still functioning, still sane-ish, still capable of holding conversations and dispensing wisdom to newer prisoners. He's lost teeth, developed scurvy scars, aged 20 years and 3, but he's alive. He's proof that the human body can endure conditions that should kill it, that adaptation is possible even to horror. You ask him one night, the night after you watched your 5th prisoner die, what keeps him going? What's the point of surviving when survival means this? Spite, he says after a long pause. I refuse to let this place kill me. The bastards want me dead? I'll outlive them all. They want me broken? I'll bend but I won't snap. It's not much, but it's enough. Spite as a survival strategy. It's as good a reason as any, honestly better than some. There are prisoners who've survived multiple years on the Hulks. Old hands who've outlasted their original sentences but remain imprisoned through bureaucratic incompetence or deliberate cruelty. They're living encyclopedias of survival techniques, repositories of knowledge about which guards can be bribed, which diseases are survivable, which food is least likely to kill you. You learn from them how to treat scurvy sores with seawater and hope, how to catch and cook rats without getting bitten, how to sleep with one eye open, metaphorically and sometimes literally, how to make yourself small and invisible when guards are angry, how to find moments of almost pleasure in the hellscape, the way morning light through a gun port can be beautiful even here, the solidarity of shared suffering, the dark humor that keeps men from going completely mad. Survival requires surrendering who you were and becoming someone who can endure this. The you from 3 months ago wouldn't recognize the creature you're becoming, harder, colder, more calculating, willing to do things that would have horrified your previous self. But that previous self would have died here within weeks. This new self might survive long enough to see something beyond the Hulk. The question you keep returning to, though, is whether survival is worth what it costs. If you leave here through transportation or some miracle pardon, will you ever recover? Can the psychological damage be undone? Will you carry the Hulk inside you forever? A prison you can never truly escape even if your body walks free? Thomas shrugs when you voice these thoughts. Probably not, he says. But I'd rather be damaged and free than dead and not. Wouldn't you? You suppose you would. You suppose that's why you're still scratching marks into the beam, still eating the weevil-infested hardtack, still performing work details and avoiding guards and navigating the social hierarchy. You're still trying to survive, despite everything, despite the odds, despite not being entirely sure why survival matters anymore. The stories of escape and survival are what you have instead of hope. They're not promises. The universe makes no promises to prisoners on rotting ships, but they're possibilities. Thin, unlikely possibilities, but real. Men have escaped. Men have survived. You could be one of them, or you could join Robert and the others at the bottom of the Thames, or die during transportation, or survive to Australia only to die there. The future is vast and mostly terrible, but it exists, and while it exists, you exist, and that's something. Tonight you lie on your platform, listening to the familiar symphony of suffering, and you make a choice. You choose to survive one more day, not because you're brave or strong or hopeful, but because you're stubborn, spiteful, and not quite ready to give the Hulk the satisfaction of killing you. One more day. That's the only promise you can make yourself. And tomorrow, if you wake up, you'll make the same promise again. This is survival on the 18th century prison Hulk. Not heroic, not dignified, but real. You survive not because you want to, but because some stubborn part of you refuses to stop. and sometimes that's enough. The morning they come for you, day 147, though your count has become unreliable and you might be off by weeks, starts no differently than any other. The same shouting guards, the same weevil-infested hardtack, the same shuffle to the work detail. But then your name is called. Your actual name. Not you there, or prisoner, or a number. And hearing it spoken aloud after months of anonymity sends a shock through your system like touching ice. Transportation list, the guard says, consulting a ledger that looks like it's been through a war. You're assigned to the Alexander, departing Portsmouth for New South Wales in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. After months of not knowing if transportation would come this year, this decade, or ever, you're given 3 weeks' notice that your time on the Hulk is ending. You should feel relief, joy, hope. Instead, you feel a strange numbness and a knot of terror in your stomach because you've heard stories about the transportation ships, and some of those stories make the Hulk sound pleasant by comparison. The next 3 weeks pass in a surreal blur. You're moved to a different section of the Hulk, the transport hold, where prisoners awaiting their ships are kept. The conditions are somehow worse. More crowded because this is temporary housing, so they pack you in tighter. You're sharing space with men from other Hulks, all bound for the same ship, all trying to process what's about to happen to them. Thomas isn't coming with you. His name wasn't called, and he accepts this with the resignation of a man who stopped expecting good news years ago. "I'll die here," he says matter-of-factly on your last night together. 3 years and counting. "I'll be here 5, 10, however long it takes." He gives you advice for the voyage. Drink any water you can get. Stay on the surgeon's good side. Watch out for the violent prisoners who see the voyage as an opportunity to settle scores away from the guard's immediate oversight. You give him your spare shirt, the one without quite as many holes. He gives you a small piece of metal he somehow kept hidden, good for picking locks or trading. It's the closest thing to a sentimental goodbye men like you can manage. You don't say you'll miss him because that's absurd. You'll be grateful to never see him or this place again. But there's something between you, forged in shared suffering, and leaving him behind feels like betrayal even though you have no choice in the matter. The Alexander is a former merchant vessel, commandeered for transportation duty and modified to hold prisoners in conditions that make the Hulk look spacious. You and 200 other prisoners are marched onto the ship in chains, down into a hold that's been fitted with sleeping platforms stacked 3 high with barely enough space between them to sit upright. The air is already thick with the smell of too many bodies in too little space. The voyage is supposed to take 8 months, weather permitting. 8 months at sea, confined to this floating wooden box, eating salted meat and hardtack, drinking brackish water from barrels that'll be breeding grounds for disease by week 3. The mortality rate on transportation ships is significant. Historians estimate anywhere from 3 to 30% depending on the ship, the year, the captain's competence, and sheer luck. You're gambling with odds that aren't in your favor, but you're gambling anyway because what choice do you have? The first week at sea is hell in a new configuration. Seasickness hits everyone, even the former sailors who should be immune. You're vomiting into buckets that overflow almost immediately, creating a sloshing nightmare on the deck as the ship pitches and rolls. You can't keep food down, but they keep giving you rations anyway, waste not, want not, and the cycle continues. Your body, already weakened by months on the Hulk, loses weight it doesn't have to lose. Disease breaks out in week 2. Dysentery, of course, your old friend, making an appearance on a new stage. Then typhus, spread by the lice that made the journey with you from the Hulk because apparently even transportation can't shake those bastards. Men start dying, and there's no Thames to dump them in anymore, so they're wrapped in canvas and tossed overboard with minimal ceremony. The sharks follow the ship, learning that where you go, food follows. But here's the thing, and this is the part that surprises you, the voyage is somehow easier than the Hulk. Not because conditions are better, they're not really, but because there's movement, literal and metaphorical. The ship is sailing somewhere, taking you towards something rather than keeping you in suspended animation. The psychological difference between stasis and progress, even progress toward an unknown and possibly terrible destination, is profound. You're going somewhere. That simple fact, after months of going nowhere, trapped in place while time passed meaninglessly around you, is almost intoxicating. Each day brings you closer to Australia, closer to the end of this voyage, closer to something that isn't the suffocating darkness of a prison hulk. It's not hope, exactly. You're too damaged for something as bright as hope, but it's direction, and direction is enough. The ship's surgeon is actually competent, which is such a novel experience that you initially distrust it. He distributes lemon juice for scurvy, actually treats wounds instead of just bleeding everyone, and seems genuinely interested in keeping prisoners alive. He's working within terrible constraints, limited medicine, overcrowded conditions, diseases he can't cure, but he's trying, and trying is more than you experienced on the Hulk. You make it to Australia. Not everyone does. 30 men died during the voyage and were fed to the sharks, but you do. When land finally appears on the horizon after 8 months at sea, you feel something you haven't felt in almost a year. You feel something. It's not joy. It's too complicated for joy, too mixed with trauma and exhaustion and bone-deep damage. But it's not nothing, and not nothing is an improvement. New South Wales is its own nightmare. Make no mistake. It's a penal colony in a hostile land, and you'll spend years here in conditions that are often brutal. You'll labor in chain gangs, suffer under administrators who view you as expendable, endure a climate and landscape that seems actively hostile to human life. But it's not the Hulk. There's sky above you, not wooden beams. There's space around you, not packed bodies. There's air that moves, sun that warms, a horizon you can see. Some prisoners never recover from the Hulk experience. You see them in the colony. Men who survive transportation only to continue deteriorating. Their minds broken beyond repair. Their bodies going through the motions while their spirits remain trapped in the darkness below deck on a ship that's now halfway around the world. They die young, or they die old, but having never truly lived after leaving the Hulk. The prison ship killed them. It just took years for their bodies to realize it. Others adapt, transform, even thrive in a way that would seem impossible given what they endured. They build lives in the colony, marry, have children, establish businesses once their sentences are served. They carry scars, physical and psychological, but they carry them while living, which is more than seemed possible during those dark months on the Hulk. You're somewhere in between, probably. You survive, you function, you build something approximating a life in Australia. The nightmares persist. You'll wake screaming about the Hulk decades later, your wife holding you while you shake and weep and try to remember that you're not there anymore. You're free. You survived. The sound of dripping water will trigger panic attacks. Confined spaces will make you desperate and violent. You'll never fully recover, but you'll recover enough. Historians still argue whether the prison Hulk system served any legitimate penological purpose or was simply warehousing that destroyed more lives than it rehabilitated. From where you stand now, 20 years later, a free man in Australia with a small farm and a family, you can tell them, it destroyed. It destroyed systematically, efficiently, thoroughly. Whatever the government's intention, the effect was human demolition. You never forget Thomas. Sometimes you wonder if he died on the Hulk, if he finally gave up, or if disease took him, or if he's somehow still there, ancient now, the oldest old hand, still scratching marks into beams and eating weevil-infested hardtack and waiting for a transportation that'll never come. You'll never know, and the not knowing haunts you. You never forget the sounds. The creaking of wood, the scratch of rats, the coughing and moaning and praying in the darkness. There with you always, a soundtrack to your life that plays quietly in the background of even your happiest moments. Your daughter's wedding is beautiful, and underneath your joy, you hear the Hulk. Your son's birth is miraculous, and beneath your wonder, you hear the Hulk. It's there. It's always there. You never forget what you learned about human nature, how quickly civilization dissolves under pressure, how thin the veneer of dignity and compassion really is, how people can adapt to horrors that should be unendurable. You learned that you're capable of both more resilience and more cruelty than you imagined, that survival requires compromises you never thought you'd make, that the person who entered the Hulk and the person who left it are different people, and you're not entirely sure you like what you became. But you survived. That's not nothing. In a system designed to break you, you bent but didn't shatter. In conditions that killed more men than they released, you lived. In darkness so complete it should have consumed you, you maintained enough of yourself to eventually emerge and build a life. The 18th century prison Hulk was a horror show, a floating catastrophe, A system that treated human beings as disposable units to be stored in the cheapest possible way until they could be transported or died, whichever came first. It was disease-ridden, violent, psychologically devastating, and completely inhumane by any reasonable standard. And you survived it. Now, all these years later, lying in your bed in Australia, you can feel the exhaustion pulling at you. Not the terrible, bone-deep exhaustion of the Hulk, but the peaceful tiredness of a long day's honest work. Your wife breathes softly beside you. Outside, the night birds call to each other. Sounds nothing like the rats and suffering you once listened to in the darkness. You close your eyes, and for once, the nightmares don't come. Instead, there's just darkness, peaceful, silent, safe. The kind of darkness that means sleep, not imprisonment. The kind of quiet that means rest, not death. You wouldn't have lasted a day on that prison Hulk, honestly. The you from before, the young thief with no understanding of real hardship, would have broken immediately. But you're not that person anymore. That person died in the darkness and was replaced by someone harder, someone damaged, someone who knows exactly how much a human being can endure and still survive. You made it. Against all odds, despite everything, you made it. And tomorrow, when you wake, you'll wake free, with sky above you and space around you and a life that's yours to live. It won't erase what happened. It won't heal all the wounds, but it'll be enough. It'll have to be enough, because you survived. The hull lies still in your memories now, the familiar creaking softened to something almost gentle, the darkness no longer threatening but fading, like a dream dissolving in the first light of morning. The rats still scatter in the corners of your mind, but their claws are quieter now. The voices of the lost, Thomas, Robert, all the others who didn't make it, whisper their farewells and slowly, gently, fall silent. You breathe in the clean air of your Australian night. You feel the weight of blankets instead of chains. You hear the peaceful sounds of a world that isn't trying to kill you. The past is there, always will be, but it's past now. Behind you, survived. Rest now. You've earned it. You've earned every peaceful breath, every moment of safety, every night that doesn't echo with the sounds of suffering. The Hulk is gone. You're here. You made it. Sleep now. Dream of tomorrow, not yesterday. Dream of sky and space and freedom. You survived. Sweet dreams.